Good God, y'all, it's Diamond Dallas Page, the king of bada bing. High five, the man that made you feel the bang. Courtesy of the Diamond Cutter that he mastered, he perfected, he could hit on anybody out of nowhere. Cinderella story, storied rivalry with Randy Savage that they certainly spent a lot of time on in this hour-long documentary. They could have honestly gone 2 hours, dived into more aspects of Diamond Dallas Page's career and life, but no. They couldn't do that. They had to tell the story their way, but Diamond Dallas Page, one of the greatest overachievers in the history of professional wrestling, arguably the greatest overachiever in the history of professional wrestling, and this is his story. This is his life. Condensed. Massively condensed. Let's talk about all of it. I'm John Renton with my review WWE on A&E Biography, WWE Legends on Diamond Dallas Page. Look, I understood why they did some hour-long features last season when they did Yokozuna, even though I think they could have dived into some more stuff. Paige, I understood, given her run, knee injuries and all that stuff. Charlotte, because her career is still going on. Jerry Lawler should have been 2 hours to dive into more aspects of his career and life, good, bad, and indifferent. Same with Diamond Dallas Page, who really part of some of my favorite moments in the Monday Night Wars era. And they really could have dived into some more shit. They put some good stuff here, but this was just about the same as the short documentary they did for a Diamond Dallas Page DVD set they did a few years ago. That being said, it was great to hear from Dallas. It was nice that there were some good talking heads. I just wish this could have been 2 hours. And I'm going to talk about some of the stuff they left out and some of the stuff they could have expanded on, including a couple things that I'm going to mention that I just feel like diving into and tearing into. So, DDP talking about how you got to be positive, shake it off, and move forward. He is truly, one of the greatest, examples of the American dream. He has definitely worked hard. No, I'm not talking about Dusty Rhodes, even though he praises Dusty Rhodes constantly for taking a chance on him and believing in him. You can tell how much Dusty meant to Dallas. He did a lot of good stuff until his run in WWE that they completely glossed over. I mean, I get it, but again, they really should have mentioned how he wasn't a fan of it. But then again, they probably didn't want DDP to mention that his WWE run was absolute shit, even though he tried to make it work by the end. Grew up with his grandmother. Let's just say his dad wasn't exactly the best guy. DDP kind of had to raise himself. He had ADD and dyslexia. He got hit by a car at grade 7 that basically destroyed his knee. He wanted to keep doing athletics, played basketball at St. Joseph High School. We see archival footage of the Madison Square Garden shows and brief Crockett stuff. Brief. Again, I know only an hour, but come on. And he wanted to get into wrestling, Asbury Park Convention Center. He asked Greg Valentine about getting into wrestling and said, oh, go fuck yourself. But he was being a heel, and Greg Valentine at that point just was one of the premier workers as far as like in-ring talent in professional wrestling. And he blew out his knee, I believe in 78, 79, if I remember right. It's somewhere around that time. So he got into nightclub work. He's talked about this stuff, and he said, it was the booze, the babes, and the partying and all that. It was just insane. And Norma Jean's dance club, he kept talking about that. He saw WrestleMania 2. They showed a bit of footage of Jake Roberts beating George Wells, perennial enhancement talent for like the bigger companies. And that was kind of nice. And he said that Jake Roberts really inspired him. And you could see why. Jake Roberts, as far as psychology, in-ring psychology, and doing what it took for Jake Roberts to get over, it worked for him. Met him in a club. Terry Taylor chimes in basically saying, I'm on my way out and you're around my age and you're just getting in. Because, he had dabbled in wrestling. And then he wasn't going to be able to succeed in wrestling. Or was he? Well, he was, obviously. Otherwise, this wouldn't be much of a biography. His ex-wife, Kimberly, chimes in. And Kimberly, my God, still looks amazing. I mean, seemingly hasn't aged a goddamn bit since the last time you saw her on WCW television. I mean, she's 54, I think. Looks great. Kept in great shape. I don't know what necessarily she's doing right now, but she seems to be doing well. That's good. That they basically, it was a whirlwind romance. They got married like a year or so after first dating. He decided to maybe become a manager. Diamond Dallas Page with the Diamond Exchange. They skipped over all that stuff in the AWA. That would have been something cool to dive into, even if, like, realistically, at that point, AWA television was hard to watch. They could I'm so frustrated by the fact that they just did not make this 2 hours. There's no excuse for why they couldn't make this 2 hours. But the AWA stuff, I believe, is, part of the Diamond Exchange. He had the Diamond Dolls. They're all stripper hot, as he said in previous documentaries, and I believe on some Legends of the Round Table discussions. That actually, you'll get some really good stories from Dallas, listening to those, or watching those episodes. And then, the AWA footage just totally skipped over, and then to WCW, because Dusty saw something in him, took a liking to him. He did an impression, and Dusty was like, was that a recording? No, Dusty, that was me. January 1991, the Power Hour. He was managing Scott Hall. If I recall correctly, he managed the Fabulous Freebirds, Hayes and Jimmy Jam Garvin at some point. And they skipped over some of that. They were just jamming this footage in. And I have a feeling they actually meant to make this 2 hours, and then they added down to an hour, and this was sloppy. This was really sloppily put together. Kimberly knew it would be rough. Magnum, who was still doing interviews at that point in 91, I totally forgot about that, said, you're taking away from the wrestlers and, with your gimmicks. And he says, are you telling me I'm too outlandish for professional wrestling? Dallas said. He decided to become a manager at age 35. And I believe Hayes has even gone on record. I think it was a Legends of Roundtable thing. He says, what do you think about me becoming a wrestler? And me and Garvin fell on the ground. But power plant footage, which was a joke of a training facility, you could just tell by it was a cool setup, but just the way they taught him. Only a couple success stories came out of that. You had Sarge, who was a joke of a trainer. I mean, you could just tell. But DDP proved a lot of people wrong. Hogan chimed in. I knew he was going to make it. I guarantee goddamn to you, before Hogan got to WCW, you had no fucking clue who Diamond Dallas Page was. But then again, he was doing Thunder in Paradise, so maybe he saw some of that stuff. I don't know. Hard to tell with Hogan. But he found religion, so he has to tell the truth now. So he said it was tough. There were some money issues. Jake Roberts, who had left WWE, came to WCW. They skipped over the whole Bill Watts thing, how Bill Watts didn't see anything in Dallas, and Dallas basically went and did the independents, and that was even tougher, but he was earning experience and studying. The tape studying thing, I think, is an aspect they could have dived into, because he had tapes. He even talked about how he wished he had kept some of them, because he kept taping over some, but that, Jake Roberts was having his his demons were taking hold. He crashed at Dallas's place, I think, until he let the snake out, which is not a euphemism. Apparently his snake did get out. Watts, basically, I wish they had gone more into the stuff with Watts. How Watts had an emphasis on wrestling in 1992, and that was a good idea. The top rope thing was kind of stupid for that time. The top rope, over the top rope to the floor rule, a move off the top or throwing somebody over the top, worked in the territory days. It didn't work in 1992 WCW with how it was being presented before. Going back to basics, going back to wrestling was fine. But it's proof that you can't go back on some things. Jake was totally behind him. Dallas I forgot that Dallas actually came into WCW, or back to WCW in 93, because he was gone for a bit. But then we go back to December 1991. Bischoff, saw him as somebody that could have potential, but here's the problem. Bischoff was a C-Squad announcer at this point. Now, maybe he saw something in him. I don't know, but it's not like Bischoff was running things. He didn't start running things until spring of 1993? We skipped to 1993. I wish they had shown some stuff on the indies, or at least talked about it. But again, hour long, 45 minutes with commercials. 93, 95, they messed around with the footage. He was hitting the diamond cutter on various people, enhancement talents, and lower card guys. And, it was MGM Studios, Disney MGM Studios. He wrote down that he will be a world champion in 5 years or less. And he made it in about 4 years and 14 days, I believe he ended up saying. Hogan showed up in 94. How are you getting better? Now, yes, DDP was busting up his body and beating himself up. And look, for all the bumps that he took and all the willingness that he was, all the punishment he was willing to put his body through, he deserves respect for that. But I wish they had shown, you know, like his feud with Johnny B. Bad, which I know kind of sounds funny, but for somebody that at the time was about 14 years old when they had that feud, and I was into like 15. And then they went to the Booty Man, you know, Brutus Beefcake. Can't wait for that dark side of the ring, nevertheless. I wish they had talked about that and shown more, like, you know, yeah, he had the messy hair, the goofiness, and he had to kind of drop some of the gimmicks and be more of himself. That's what Bischoff and Taylor were talking about. But all the pics and the memorabilia in his house, that was kind of cool. The reason that Hall and Nash actually got into WCW was Dallas was talking to them because he managed Hall before. I think he might, I don't think he mentioned or managed Nash when I think he might have managed him, that is, easy for me to say, when Nash was Vinny Vegas, but that didn't last very long. And the reason they got back in 1996 was because Dallas was talking to them. And them, the NWO, all that stuff. Later in the they skipped over more stuff where he was really getting over. He was the king of the Battle Bowl ring. You know, he had that, and he was getting more over in 96. Had some pretty good matches on Nitro. And then in I believe the New Orleans Superdome, if I recall correctly, not the Silverdome, Hogan, they that was where they pulled the trigger on him, hitting the Diamond Cutter on Hall, and after putting the NWO shirt on, and then Nash taking a great bump where he basically almost sends the table legs first into the audience. Good job there, Nash. But they totally skipped over Randy and DDP having their feud. I'm not saying they need to go over every single television episode, every single interaction, every single pay-per-view match in minute detail. But they could have, and it would have made this program a whole lot better because, again, they probably did have 2 hours, and A&E's like, oh, we just want to do an hour, or WWE's like, we're still mad at Savage, so we'll just do this. I don't know the reason why they would skip over that, again, except for time constraints, and it was bullshit. So, you know, in early 97, you had that stuff happen where, if I'm right, Savage joined the NWO sometime before or right at Super Brawl 7, Super Brawl 97, which was 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, yeah, Super Brawl 7. I was trying to do that in my head. Sorry, the math was going a little bit crazy. But then they had the stuff where DDP, or Savage was messing with DDP's wife. Liz was getting involved. There were catfights. There was stuff like that going on. And they built up to this Spring Stampede 97 match. And the idea, I think it was Arn or somebody. It was somebody that was coming and talking to DDP, or talking DDP and Savage. And Savage, what do you want to do? And Savage like, I think I want to take the Diamond Cutter tonight. And yeah, they had interference. They had bullshit and stuff like that. But he hit it. Boom. 1, 2, 3. Boom. Right there. Made man. Made goddamn man right there. And that wasn't the only time that they faced off on pay-per-view. I think they faced off in either a cage match or in a match on Nitro in 98. And it was March or April of 98. It might have been February. It was somewhere around in early 98 where they faced off. And that's when Savage, his knees were just totally goddamn shattered. Can't imagine why. All those double axe handles, all that stuff that he'd been doing years before he even got on national television. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the DDP Savage rivalry a little bit more. You had the Spring Stampede match. You had more stuff that they were building. You know, they would do skirmishes on TV. Kimberly would get painted. Liz would get involved. Liz would get on top. God, I wish. Anyway, just Liz, goddamn, I'd fuck Lex Luger for helping to get her involved in that. I will maintain that while Liz was an adult, Lex gets too little of the blame for how things went, because he was just as guilty as she was. That being said, they were having more skirmishes. Great American Bash 97. What I loved is that they kept doing something. One of the greatest moments of the feud, and one of the greatest moments in Nitro history. La Parka, in quotations, was facing off against Randy Savage. And Savage is just doing this. And Scott Hall was having his arguments with Larry Zbyszko. And looking at La Parka there and looking at DDP, actually, if you put the costume on, they kind of were similar size. Maybe a couple different inches in height, but did this stuff. La Parka's getting beat down. Randy does a spit, goes for a sky elbow, gets hit in the face, boots up, and La Parka hits the diamond cutter, and it's fucking perfect. And get goosebumps just thinking about it. 1, 2, takes the mask off. The crowd pops like crazy. 3, La Parka beats Randy Savage. Hall's pissed. They're doing all this stuff. And DDP, once again, getting one over on the NWO. Then they had the Great American Bash match, which was a sudden death match, I believe. And then they had the Las Vegas Street Fight, or maybe it was Las Vegas Sudden Death. I know they had some kind of Falls Count Anywhere something match at Great American Bash, and I think it was the Las Vegas Sudden Death match at Halloween Havoc 98. But they kept having that. They kept building this stuff. You would have Savage and the crowd up there in the Crow's Nest, almost, not quite with Sting, with Liz. And then you have DDP. They'd be cutting promos and everything, but they'd be far enough away where it's like, okay, there's no invisible wall, as Bill Watts used to say. All this stuff going on. And then they had the Las Vegas Sudden Death match. I apologize, by the way, if I sound a little bit rough. The allergy season's kicking my ass. But they did the Las Vegas match, and it was just so fucking good. Like, the Great American Bash, Las Vegas, Dusty Rhodes would lose on commentary when they used the plunder, if you will. And, that feud was incredible. And I wish they had spent more time on it. Again, time constraints aside, they could have spent some time. Fuck. That being said, what do you think of the Savage DDP rivalry? Let me know in the comments. And then they skip right to 1998. They totally skip over the mini feud that he had with Raven and winning the U.S. title and then losing the U.S. title and then ascending and having that stuff and getting into the program with Hogan. Hey, they got Karl Malone here. They got Karl Malone there. They said that there was a 13-year-old girl back there, that was ready for him when he was done doing the interview. And if you want to know more, Google Karl Malone 13. And no, I'm not going to apologize for that bullshit because I ain't slander because it's the fucking truth. He's a goddamn piece of shit that deserves every bad thing that ever will happen to him. And not enough bad shit has happened to him. Or people like him that take advantage of young children. That ignore the children they have. That groom. That assault. I mean, I'm going to try to cover my ass here and not get fucking, banned here. But yeah, he knows what he fucking did. And there ain't a damn thing that Karl Malone can do to disprove it because it's all out there. And he's skated on this stuff. And the NBA still hasn't ostracized him. Him and John Stockton were made for each other because Karl Malone's a fucking creep. John Stockton's a fucking crackpot. And if they both ended up drooling vegetables tomorrow, I'd laugh because it would be karma. That being said, Karl Malone was great. As far as being a tag partner for DDP, he took it seriously, worked hard. Karl Malone, DDP against Rodman and Hogan, Bash at the Beach 98. Not a very good match. It really isn't. I mean, Hogan and Savage actually on that end would have been good, except Savage was getting knee surgery. But DDP and Hogan basically having to craft that whole thing. Don't get me wrong. Malone and Rodman were great athletes. Rodman at that point must have been about 5 cases in because and I'm not saying cases of beer, probably cases of tequila because he was rocked. Man. So, Match at the Beach 98 was cool. He kept rising up. I wish they had shown the Halloween Havoc, clips of the Halloween Havoc match with Goldberg because it would have been so goddamn good. Hitting that diamond cutter, the crowd exploded. I mean, absolutely lost it. There was a time to end the streak and the crowd would have accepted it. That would have been it. Because you could have had Goldberg beat him at Starrcade 98. You wouldn't have needed to do the finger poke of doom. They might have been able to extend their company a little bit longer. Yes, the AOL Time Warner merger with Ted Turner caused a whole lot of issues. But don't fucking tell me that WCW didn't do a lot of self-inflicted bullshit as well. Leading up to that and afterwards. Starrcade 97, anybody? Nevertheless, he fought through all the injuries. The back injury, Kimberly suggested yoga. That helped. He would continue to work hard. They were messing around with more of the footage. January 99, he was still doing some stuff. I believe he beat the Giant at Starrcade 98. Was it the Giant or was it Henning? I think he beat Henning at 97. I think he beat the Giant at 98. Won the world title at Spring Stampede 1999 in the Tacoma Dome. I unfortunately was not there. It's not a regret, but it would have been kind of cool to see that show live. Even if Tacoma is a fucking dumpster fire of a city and I hate it. Cool people there, hate the city. It's a dive. If you've been there, you know. So Dusty believed in him. He had 3 reigns, and I think the combined reigns are 54 days. That's across 3 reigns, by the way. It's 18 days for those of you who are math majors. Skipped over the David Arquette stuff. Skipped over the death of WCW. And, you know, he was actually doing some pretty good stuff. Him and Scott Steiner had a pretty good main event at Greed. Greed on pay-per-view, the last WCW pay-per-view. They skipped over his WWE run, where he's the Undertaker's wife's stalker. He did kind of become the guru guy a little bit later on at the end of his WWE run. He suffered a neck injury, I think on a SmackDown against Hardcore Holly, if I recall correctly. If not Hardcore Holly, it was around that time, and I'm not blaming Hardcore. I'm saying that's the match I remember. Skipped over TNA. He had a couple brief, skirmishes there. Did some indies. I think he was on the Juggalo Championship Wrestling show. Boy, you want to talk about ICP? There you go. He got into yoga. Breakup with Kimberly in 2005. Helped Jake Roberts and Scott Hall. Smash cut to credits. Look, they could have gone more in depth about his in-ring career and more about his yoga stuff. Yes, we've seen the resurrection of Jake the Snake Roberts. We saw the Scott Hall biography recently, and they talked about that stuff. They still could have gone into more detail because I just feel that Diamond Dallas Page's life and career is more fascinating than what they showed. They glossed over a lot of shit. But nevertheless, I hope I gave a bit of a detailed thing about it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Redlin, and I'll see you soon.